Madam President, we are now on S-47, our lands package bill. As we have heard, Senator Lankford's amendment has just been called up, and I'm happy to speak to that. I understand that he is in process coming back to the Hill, so we will wait for his arrival and he can speak directly to his amendment. But I wanted to take just a couple of minutes right off the top here and speak to some of the broader provisions in this bill that I view as significant. It was interesting, I was just visiting with our President Pro Tem, and he thanked me. He says, thank you, because we have a provision that helps Council Bluffs, Iowa. It's something we've been working on for a long, long time, and now it appears it will be finally resolved through this legislation. That's a prime example of what we have put together with this 100-plus package of lands and water bills, bills that help sportsmen and women, bills, measures that help us with conservation. It is really a very wide and broad effort, and yet so many of these provisions are so very local and so very parochial. But very local issues can really help with economic development in a region. And I wanted to be able to highlight how this package does create economic opportunities in our communities across the country. For example, when this bill is signed into law, in Fannin County in rural Texas, they will gain local control over the Lake Fannin recreation area from the Forest Service. This recreation area right now, we're told, is run down. It's been closed to the public for many years. The county is looking forward to actually taking ownership so that it can transform Lake Fannin into a multi-use recreation area, complete with trails, playgrounds, and water recreation, so allowing people, encouraging people to come and visit and to enjoy. We also include a provision for La Paz County in Arizona. This conveys a parcel of federal land to facilitate the development of large-scale solar project. It will also allow for a link to an electric transmission line. So this is going to be creating local jobs. It's going to be bringing renewable energy online to power many of our communities. So great benefit there. In Tucson, Arizona, we remove bureaucratic obstacles. We allow the city to operate a park. Now, they've done this apparently for dozens of years without the control of a federal agency. And so when the local citizens want to operate, whether it's a farmer's market, they're not going to have to jump over these hurdles or be subject perhaps to the whims of the federal officials out there. Instead, they're allowed to make these local decisions. For heaven's sakes, you want to put a little farmer's market in there, you shouldn't have to come to Congress to ask for permission. Another example, I mentioned this one before in South Dakota, Custer County. This is a conveyance that will allow the county to have full ownership of all the lands on which it operates its airport. So what it will do is allow the county to expand the airport so you can get a little bit larger aircraft into the airport. So again, you want to think about economic opportunity. If you can't bring more folks into your community, into your region, you're limited. Conveyances like this, again, small-scale acreage that can allow for that expansion of opportunity is strong and is important. So this is, again, yet another reminder as to the opportunities that we create for our local communities. We're also expanding and designating new areas of off-highway vehicle recreation in the Mojave Desert. This is out in San Bernardino County in California. The OHV recreation is a growing sector in the outdoor recreation economy. It's so important to a lot of our communities. We also encourage agencies to look for new opportunities for fishing, for hunting, for recreation on our federal lands. Again, this is a very, very significant sector in our economy. Consumer spending by hunters and anglers and target shooters supports over 1.6 million jobs. It's about $71.8 billion in salaries per year. And of course, that ripple effect then to the larger communities when you're able to bring in folks to enjoy these areas. Again, just further example of how we really work to create new economic opportunities and why this lands bill, this lands package is so important. So we're creating economic opportunities, but we also fix a lot of problems. That's one of the things that we try to do within the Energy Committee. And sometimes problems are created because you just didn't even know that it was actually your federal government or your land disposition that was causing any form of impediment. But we really do work with a number of these provisions to help solve real problems with federal land management. There's one example that I think my friends from Louisiana would appreciate, and this relates to the situation at Lake Bistineau. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's sponsored by Senator Cassidy, but back in 2017, there were a couple residents who wrote to Senator Cassidy, and they were outlining their problem, and they said, look, our family purchased our land, our minerals, our home in the subject section over 13 years ago after retiring. And they go on to say, we've lived in our home on the land ever since. There were no contrary claims or clouds on the title to the property when we purchased it. Therefore, we were disturbed to discover that the government felt it had a claim to our title. That would be kind of a bummer of a letter to receive. You've been living there for over a dozen years, and now you find out, well, maybe you don't have a clear title there. And Lake Bistineau has a long and a very complicated history with the federal government. The land in question was conveyed by the federal government to the local levy district in 1901, and then it was subsequently deeded to private individuals. But in the 60s, BLM resurveyed the land, and then they realized that the boundary line was incorrect. And that survey led to the determination that about 200 acres of land currently held privately was actually federal land. And that's a real problem, of course. And as the letter to Senator Cassidy went on, they said, just a few years ago, we had the property listed for sale. Once the suggested claim was made by the BLM in their 2013 letter, a potential contract on the property fell through. So this is a situation, again, people living happily in their home for a period of time decide that they're going to be moving on, and now they are limited, they're handcuffed. They had no idea that this was a problem that they had to deal with. And it's not just them. There were more than 100 private landowners in Louisiana that were impacted by this. This is land, again, that's been held under private title for over a century now, places where people have built their homes, their businesses, their lives, and now it's unclear where exactly everybody stands. So in the case of Lake Bistineau, our bill clarifies ownership of the land. It prevents the federal government from ever claiming it in the future. And these are the types of problems that I think, as people go through this to look at the individual bills that we have included, these are the types of things that really help people. They help improve people's lives. They help improve our local economies. And unfortunately, sometimes it literally takes an act of Congress to clear up whether these are problems or impediments to our opportunities. So again, very, very important what we have managed to address within the structure of this bill. I want to address the issue that will be before us this afternoon, and that's a conversation about the Land and Water Conservation Fund. As I mentioned, Senator Lankford's amendment is before us, and I wanted to kind of put in context what it is that we have done within our lands package proposal, the title that relates to LWCF, as we call it. This is in Title III. And effectively, what the Land and Water Conservation establishes and what our provision does is we make permanent the authorization within LWCF. So we deposit oil and gas receipts into the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and then also within our bill, we make some common sense reforms to the LWCF Act. This is something that, in my view, has been a long time in coming. We've had good collaboration going back and forth as to how we can make these reforms and also allow for this important conservation fund to be authorized permanently going forward. A little bit of a history here. LWCF was enacted to help preserve, to develop, and assure access to outdoor recreation resources. It's kind of a paper trust fund that accumulates revenues from the federal motorboat fuel tax and surplus property sales, then to supplement these sources to reach the annualized level of $900 million is what the authorized is. That's not a figure that we have reached historically, that's for sure. But the fund also then accumulates revenue from oil and gas leases from the Outer Continental Shelf, the OCS. So as we see those revenues come in, those revenues from the fossil fuel go to fund an account, if you will, the LWCF fund, to help with conservation and to help in ways that allow for, whether states are moving forward with conservation efforts or federal entities, it helps to fund that. So the authorization to deposit oil and gas receipts into the LWCF expired on September 30th of 18, so at the end of this past fiscal year. So what we have to do in order to make sure that those LWCF funds are made available. The monies in the fund are only available if they're appropriated by Congress. Currently, we have an unappropriated balance of just over $20 billion in the LWCF. So some have said, oh my gosh, you know, the authorization expired in September, nothing is happening within LWCF. In fairness, those funds are still coming in. What we need to do is make sure that they are then available for distribution and for appropriation, and that's what we will do with this authorization. So the amendments to LWCF in this bill are, again, very important to the structure of the fund. They are well supported in the Senate. We've been focusing on this expiration date and the deposits to LWCF for a long, long time. I think we've had kind of this stop-and-go approach of how long are we going to reauthorize LWCF? Is it a 2-year? Is it a 3-year? Is it permanent? Is it not? We go back and forth and back. Let's come to the place where we can accept that this conservation fund is important on a host of different levels, but let's also work to make sure that we have reformed, in a sense, how we utilize this fund. So through this measure, we're making the authorization permanent. Spending from the LWCF still remains subject to appropriations. So let me just outline some of the reforms that we have included. In fairness, they don't go as far as I would like them to, but they clearly reflect a bipartisan, bicameral agreement. The original, I'll go do a little more history again, but the 1965 authorization, the original authorization for LWCF, provided that states would receive 60% of the funding, and then the federal agencies would receive 40%. So the stateside dollars, what we've seen where they have gone in the past, they go to outdoor recreation facilities, and these are in areas where people generally live, from the local city playgrounds, baseball fields, local fishing holes, state parks. Certainly in states like mine, what we're able to do with the state parks with LWCF monies are really very, very beneficial and very much appreciated. So back in 1976, so we set it up in 1965. Then in 76, Congress stripped this 60-40 split from the Act. So the question there is why? And the because is there was concern in Congress that by increasing the authorization level to $900 million, that some states would have difficulty in meeting the 50-50 match required to receive the funds. So in an effort to provide some flexibility there, Congress then replaced the 60-40 state-federal split with the current language, which provides that not less than 40% of the appropriations from the LWCF should be for federal purposes. So we've gone from basically a guarantee that the states would get 60% of the funding to really kind of flipping that and saying not less than 40% goes to federal purposes. But what happened was not really the result that the Congress had intended. According to the Congressional Research Service, over the last 25 years, what we've seen is over 84% of the funds have gone to federal purposes, primarily for land acquisition. So now we're seeing, because we don't have that more clearly defined split, we have seen that federal acquisition increase significantly. And when we talk about Land and Water Conservation Fund Act these days, it's almost always about the federal land acquisition side. And in my view, that's disappointing. That's not the direction that I would like. I think so many have seemed to have forgotten about the very, very pivotal role that the states have in conservation and outdoor recreation under the Act. So what we do in our LWCF section is we recognize that states are the leaders on recreation and conservation. And so what we do is we aim to restore the balance to the state-federal split by ensuring that at least 40% of the LWCF funds have to be allocated to the state-side program. We want to try to get back to a greater level of equity instead of where we have seen, again, where you have over 84% of the funds going to federal purposes. So we also recognize the importance of access to existing federal lands. And in our measure, we amend the LWCF to set aside the greater of 3% or $15 million per year to improve access for sportsmen and other recreation opportunities. For those of us in the sportsmen's community, those of us that are hunters, those of us that are fishermen, access to these lands is really, really important. We don't want to just have them and not be able to utilize them. So it's the traditions that we have of being able to, whether it's going out hiking or going out fishing, but being out in these federal lands, this is the importance. So we recognize that in this legislation. I have made no secret of the fact that I worry about what many would consider to be unfettered land acquisition by the federal government. In my state, the federal government controls almost 224 million acres. To put it into context, Alaska's pretty big. You know how big it is. It's the biggest out there. It's 1/5 the size of the United States of America. About 63% of our lands are held in federal ownership. That is, to put it in another context, that's about 1/3 larger than all of Texas. So all of our federal lands are about 1/3 larger than all of Texas. So it's a lot. And large amounts of federal lands within a state give the federal government outsized influence in what happens in these states. And so to begin to address these issues, the LWCF section that's contained in our bipartisan product requires the resource secretaries to consider conservation easements instead of fee title acquisitions where appropriate and feasible. This will help keep lands in private ownership as working lands. This is a measure that my colleague from South Dakota has been pushing and advancing. In addition, we also amend the LWCF to require the agencies to take into account certain considerations in acquiring lands. This is like the geographic distribution, whether the acquisition would result in management efficiencies and cost savings. We know that we have this kind of checkerboard pattern of federal lands. So being smart about our acquisitions to develop efficiencies is, again, the direction that we seek to take with this measure. So as you can see, Madam President, we put a lot of work into the provision. We have focused very, very, very keenly on LWCF, recognizing the priority that it is to so many. I think we have tried to find that balance between reforms that are workable, reforms that acknowledge the role that our states play, and put some contours on the LWCF that I think members can appreciate and support. I see that my friend and my colleague from South Dakota is here. I don't know, maybe you want to talk about that little airport in Custer County. I've never been there, but hopefully it's going to make a little bit of a difference to you when there's a couple hundred acres that are conveyed to Custer County. But I'll yield to my friend from South Dakota, and we'll be speaking about these and other measures as they come before the floor. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.